The sky had looked like spilled ink for days. Rain clung to the windows of the Albatross Cafe like old regret. Outside, the ocean moaned against the shore in long, slow breaths, as if even the waves were tired. Inside, Nora Belrose sat at the counter with her fingers curled around a chipped mug of tea. Chamomile, weak, flavorless, and too familiar. The cafe had once been her mother's. All pale woods, antique shelves, glass jars, and scalloped table linens hand-stitched in late spring evenings. Her mother used to play jazz from a Bluetooth speaker she refused to replace even when it cracked and crackled. Now the silence hung like fog. Nora had changed very little after inheriting the place, except for removing the photographs near the register. Not out of disrespect. Just, she couldn't look at them anymore. The door hadn't chimed in 4 hours. In fact, it barely chimed at all these days. Most people in Halewick drove into the next town for their coffee. Better parking, they'd said, or fancier menu. Truth was, they followed whatever was shinier, newer, glossier than what she offered. Nora didn't chase the new. She chased quiet. And it had caught her, finally, completely, and without pity. She turned the mug in her hand absent-mindedly. A small crack ran down the side. Not enough to leak. Just enough to notice. She felt like that mug some days. The wind rattled the glass doors. Nora stood to close the side windows. The air smelled of salt and wet earth. Somewhere down the alley, a cat yowled, and a bottle rolled in the gutter. Just as she turned back toward the counter, the door opened. It wasn't dramatic. No loud slam. No squeaky hinges. Just the quiet jingling of the old bell her mother once loved, soft and sudden. Nora's hand froze on the edge of the espresso machine. The man who entered didn't look like he belonged in Halewick. His coat was soaked and clung to his shoulders. Raindrops trailed down his neck. His hair, dark and unruly, was plastered to his forehead. He paused just inside the doorway, blinking like he wasn't sure if the place was real. "You open?" he asked, voice low and warm. "Technically," Nora said, setting the mug aside. "If you're not in a rush." "I'm not," he said, stepping forward. "Not anymore." He walked slowly toward the counter, glancing around the place. His eyes lingered on the window seat where ivy grew wild around a worn cushion. Then at the chalkboard menu, faded, a little smudged from humidity. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please." "How do you take it?" He hesitated. "Dealer's choice." Nora raised an eyebrow. "That's risky." "I make strong coffee." "I could use strong." She turned without another word and started the brew. The cafe filled with the scent of toasted beans and something sweeter, vanilla maybe. He pulled off his coat and folded it carefully over the back of a chair. That surprised her. Most people tossed things carelessly. This man, however, moved like he valued stillness. "New in town?" she asked as she poured. "You could say that," he replied, sitting at the corner table near the windows. "I used to pass through here a long time ago." "Before you passed back through?" He smiled slightly. "Exactly." She brought the mug over to him. "This one doesn't have a crack," she said. He took it with both hands. "I'll try not to be disappointed." Nora didn't know why, but the comment made her smile. Maybe it was the dryness of it. Or the timing. Or the way his eyes met hers without trying too hard. "I'm Nora," she offered. "Callum," he said. "No last name today." She didn't press. He didn't ask anything else. He stayed for almost 2 hours, drinking slowly, watching the rain through the glass. Nora returned to wiping counters, organizing tea jars, and pretending not to glance at him every few minutes. When he finally stood, he left exact change and a folded napkin on the table. By the time she turned around, the bell had chimed and he was gone. She opened the napkin. On it, in neat black ink, was one line. You make a quiet place feel like home. Callum returned the next day. And the day after. He never ordered the same drink twice. Once it was a latte with cinnamon. Another time, black coffee with a splash of oat milk. Once he asked if she had mint tea. She did. He took it with honey and said nothing while he drank it. He never brought a laptop. Never seemed to need Wi-Fi. But sometimes, he carried a small black notebook. She never saw him write in it. I thought you were passing through, she said one evening when the cafe was almost closing. I was, he replied. Now I'm not. That was all he said. By the end of the second week, Nora had added a fresh croissant to his usual order without him asking. She told herself it was because they would otherwise go stale. He ate half, then tucked the other half into a napkin and slipped it into his coat. When she raised an eyebrow, he shrugged. For later. Something about that made her chest feel strange. Not painful, but not peaceful either. He had a way of sitting in silence that made it feel intentional. Like a conversation waiting to happen. Not lonely, just waiting. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Callum finally asked a question. Why Albatross Cafe? Doesn't exactly inspire hunger. Nora smirked. I inherited the name. He looked around. Let me guess, something poetic? Something ironic, she said. My ex said it was like carrying a burden I didn't ask for. Called it the albatross around my neck. Then left. I kept the name. Callum blinked. He sounds charming. He had good hair, she said dryly. Callum laughed softly. That counts for something. There was a pause. Then he asked, do you regret staying? Nora didn't answer right away. I used to, she said eventually. But now. I'm not sure. Maybe I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. Sometimes that's enough, he said. The words landed softly, but deep. The third week, Callum didn't come. Nor on Tuesday. Or Wednesday. Nora tried not to notice. She kept herself busy, deep cleaned the espresso machine, reorganized the back pantry, swept the alley 3 times. But each time the bell didn't ring, something inside her folded inward. On Friday, just as the sun began to fall below the sea, he returned. Soaked. Mud splattered. Out of breath. He held a small oil-stained box in both hands like it was something sacred. Car broke down, he said. No signal. Took me 2 days to hike back to town. You hiked? I promised I'd be back. She stared at him, unsure whether to yell or hug him. She chose neither. Come inside, she said. He handed her the box without a word and sat down. Inside was a tiny music box. Silver, tarnished. The ballerina in the middle was broken, her arms missing, but her face painted with a peaceful smile. It was my sister's, he said. Used to help her sleep. I keep fixing it. Never quite gets there. Nora turned the little crank gently. The melody was soft and broken but strangely beautiful. She was older. Younger, Callum said, voice distant. We lost her 6 years ago. I'm sorry, she said. So am I, he replied. The moment stretched between them like thread. Then he whispered, you remind me of her. Not how she looked. Just, the calm. Nora swallowed. I've never been called calm before. Well, he said, maybe I mean the good kind. They didn't say anything else. That night, after Callum left, Nora stayed up late in the cafe. She wrote his name for the first time in her notebook. Callum. No last name. Just. Callum. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in months, she wanted to know. 1. Elias Fenwick had a ritual. Every morning before the shop opened, he made tea in a cracked green kettle and stood by the back window of Ink and Ember, his little bookstore at the edge of a mountain town called Millridge Hollow. The window faced the east slope, where fog rolled like old wool over pine trees. He liked the silence there. Nothing rushed. Nothing shouted. Everything arrived gently, like the first pages of a well-written book. At 8:59, he would flip the wooden sign on the door from "closed" to "open" and let the scent of old paper and quiet stories welcome in whoever wandered by. Not many people did. That morning was colder than usual. He held the kettle close to his chest like a warming stone and watched as frost curled over the corners of the glass. Then, just as he turned to shelve a new box of forgotten poetry collections, he saw it again. A letter. Tucked between the doorframe and the outer glass pane. No envelope. No name. Just a folded piece of ivory paper, the edges slightly crinkled by the damp air. It was the third one this month. He unfolded it slowly. You shelve the truth like fiction. But I see the edges of your quiet. You're not as alone as you think. L. There was no signature beyond the L. Elias stared at it for a long time, heart ticking like a clock with a loose spring. Then he folded it once, twice, and placed it inside the drawer beneath the register, alongside the others. He didn't tell anyone about the letters. Not even his brother, who ran the mechanic's shop down the hill and insisted Elias should talk to people more. He didn't tell the schoolteacher who bought worn copies of Hemingway every Friday, nor the painter who always asked if they carried books with ghosts, but not the scary kind. The letters had begun appearing 6 weeks ago. They weren't love notes exactly. Not quite riddles either. But each one seemed to know him in a way no stranger should. And Elias, quiet, reclusive, stubborn, should have felt violated. Instead, he felt seen. And that scared him more than anything else. 2. His days followed a pattern. Books. Tea. Sometimes music. Always quiet. People came in and left with words. He gave them stories. None of them gave him theirs. Until her. It was Tuesday when she entered the shop. The bell above the door made its soft jingle, and Elias, halfway through cataloging a donation box, looked up and froze. She wasn't familiar. But something about her felt like déjà vu. She wore a raincoat the color of wet ash, her boots muddy, her cheeks touched by the cold. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, and when she smiled, it wasn't polite, it was warm. Honest. Smells like cedar in here, she said softly. Nice. He cleared his throat. Firewood deliveries. They stacked them too close to the vents. She didn't respond. Just wandered between the aisles, trailing her fingers over spines like she was reading with her skin. Looking for anything specific? Elias asked. She glanced over her shoulder, amused. Not really. I like finding what I didn't know I needed. He didn't know what to say to that. She paused at the fiction wall and pulled out a thin volume of poetry. Not a popular one. Shoreline Songs by Beatrice Lane. Most customers passed it by without a second glance. That's a good one, he said quietly. She opened it to the inside cover. You underlined this one. She read aloud. We spoke like lighthouses, intermittently, but always to warn or save. Elias flushed. Yeah. Sometimes I do that. I like it. She set the book down gently. I'm Lila. He nodded, not quite smiling. Elias. She stayed for over an hour, never buying anything. Just reading. Wandering. Sitting in the armchair beneath the moth-eaten quilt. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. But the next morning, there was another letter in the door. This one read. Sometimes the lighthouse needs saving, too. L. 3. Days passed. Then weeks. She came in 3 more times. Always unannounced. Always alone. Sometimes she asked about books. Sometimes she said nothing at all. Once she cried while reading the last chapter of a novel he'd shelved only yesterday. She didn't try to hide it. Elias didn't ask why. He just brought her a tissue and a cup of tea. He thought about the letters. The way she signed her name, Lila. The way the notes ended, L. But he didn't ask. He didn't want to chase something that might disappear. Still, something between them changed. When she wasn't in the shop, he noticed the silence more. Not the peaceful kind. The empty kind. One rainy afternoon, she appeared again, hood-soaked, cheeks flushed from the wind. "I had a dream about this place," she said, dropping her coat onto the stool near the register. There was no roof. Just books and stars. "That sounds like the worst kind of moisture damage," Elias said, deadpan. She laughed, the sound like bells dropped gently into water. He offered her a blanket. She took it without thanks, without hesitation. They sat in the silence for a long time. And then, as if pulled from a page neither had read aloud, she said, "You're waiting for someone." Elias blinked. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." He didn't answer. And she didn't push. But the words stayed. 4. The 4th letter changed everything. It wasn't in the door. It was inside a book. Shoreline Songs. The same copy Lila had touched weeks earlier. He'd been reshelving it after a customer left it on the counter. The note was tucked inside page 42. "I loved you once. When we were different people. I came back because I wasn't sure if you remembered. L." He sat down. The letter trembled in his hands. It was her. It had always been her. But he didn't know what she meant. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed in the shop with the kettle and a stack of memories he couldn't place. He opened an old notebook and flipped through sketches he hadn't touched in years. And there, between pages dated nearly a decade ago, her Lila, drawn in graphite. Only back then, she had gone by Evelyn. His first love. His last heartbreak. 5. The next time she came in, he didn't wait. "I know who you are," he said quietly. She didn't flinch. "Then why didn't you say something? I thought you'd left that name behind." "I had," she said. "I thought I had." Elias stepped closer. "Why come back now?" Lila, Evelyn, held his gaze. "Because you were the only person I ever knew who saw me without asking for anything. And I wanted to know if you still could." He didn't move. He wanted to touch her face. To ask what she'd been through. Why she'd vanished 10 years ago in the middle of a winter morning, leaving no note, no trace. Instead, he said, "I underlined that poem for you." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I came back." Silence filled the shop again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Of things unsaid. Of forgiveness not asked but offered. Of memory returning like light through cracked windows. He reached behind the counter. Pulled out the drawer. Held up the stack of letters. "These?" She nodded. Every word. Then she stepped forward, slowly, carefully. "You were the only chapter one never finished," she said. "And I think I want to." Elias didn't speak. He just opened his arms. And she walked into them. The inn stood on the edge of a lake that didn't have a name on any map. Lila Varon found that comforting. There was something about nameless places that made her feel a little less lost, as if the silence there didn't demand answers. The inn itself was a century-old farmhouse with ivy creeping up its stone walls and windows that creaked with every wind. She'd found it in a newspaper ad. Just a short line. Caretaker needed. Old inn. Remote. Quiet. It sounded like exactly what she needed. And what she didn't deserve. Lila arrived with one suitcase, a violin case she hadn't opened in a year, and a heart that thudded like a warning. She hadn't played since the betrayal. Not since the night her sister walked out with the man who had once asked her to marry him. Some losses hum. Others burn. This one did both. The innkeeper, a woman named May, had kind eyes and no questions. You'll have room 3. Breakfast is at 7. Sheets are in the cupboard. Just keep the fire going and don't let the pipes freeze, she said. Lila nodded, grateful for the simplicity. No past. No explanations. Just silence. 2. The lake froze at night and melted by afternoon. Lila found rhythm in chores. She chopped wood, swept the porch, made tea, and helped clean after guests. There weren't many. Mostly couples who wanted to escape noise or artists who liked to sketch fog. One afternoon, while organizing the reading room, she heard a voice through the open window. Male. Deep. Steady. She stepped onto the porch. A man was kneeling beside the garden wall, repairing one of the broken stone tiers. He looked up when she stepped outside. They stared at each other for a moment. Then he nodded. Afternoon. Hello, she replied, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. First time here, he asked. Yes. You. Been here all year, he said. Fixing whatever breaks. Lila leaned against the railing. And does it break often? Like clockwork, he said, smiling faintly. I'm Theo. She introduced herself, and he gave a slow nod, as if tucking her name into a pocket. Then he returned to his work. She didn't ask anything else. And he didn't fill the silence. Somehow, that was enough. 3. Over the following weeks, Theo appeared often. Always outdoors, always working, mending railings, replacing roof tiles, painting shutters. He spoke only when necessary, but he listened better than anyone Lila had met. One morning, she found a small wooden carving placed on her window ledge. A violin. Just a few inches long, whittled from soft cedar, and sanded smooth. She held it in her palm and stared for a long time. When she saw Theo later that day, she didn't mention it. But when their eyes met, he gave a single nod. Nothing more. And it made her want to cry. Lila spent her evenings in the sunroom, where the old piano had gone out of tune. It didn't matter. She just liked sitting beside it, pretending she was someone who still believed in music. One night, Theo joined her. He didn't sit next to her. Just near enough. After several minutes of quiet, he said, "You used to play, didn't you?" She didn't ask how he knew. "I did," she said. He glanced at the violin case in the corner. What happened? Lila looked away. Someone I loved made me feel like music wasn't mine anymore. Theo didn't speak right away. Then, gently, music isn't a possession. It's a return. She said nothing. But her throat tightened. 4. Spring came late to the inn. With it came a thunderstorm that tore a branch through the roof. Rain poured into the attic. May was away in town, and Lila, barefoot in the hallway, scrambled to pull down boxes before they got soaked. Suddenly, Theo appeared, shirt half soaked, arms full of tarp and rope. He didn't speak. Just worked. Efficient. Quick. Later, after the storm passed, Lila sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. Her hands still shook a little. Theo sat across from her. "I never thanked you," she said softly. "You don't need to." They sat in silence, firelight dancing between them. Then she asked, "Why are you here?" He didn't look at her. Because I left something behind, he said. What? Myself, he replied. That night, Lila didn't sleep. She opened the violin case. She ran her fingers over the strings. She didn't play. But she thought about it. 5. A week later, there was a power outage. The whole inn fell into candlelight. Guests left early, the phone line went dead, and May got stuck in town overnight. Lila sat in the reading room with a single candle and the violin in her lap. Theo knocked once before entering. You're going to play, he said. She shook her head. I'm not ready. You'll never be, he replied gently. No one ever is. He sat down, knees close to hers. And waited. Lila took a deep breath. She raised the bow. And played a single note. It cracked. It wavered. But it was sound. Her sound. Theo closed his eyes. She played another. Then a melody. Slow. Unsteady. But true. It wasn't a performance. It was a release. A return. When she finished, her hands trembled. Theo leaned forward. And whispered, "Welcome back." 6. Later that night, they sat outside on the porch, watching lightning flash far beyond the hills. Theo reached over. Took her hand. Held it quietly. No declarations. No promises. Just presence. Just breath. And Lila, who once believed she had nothing left to give, leaned into the stillness. And whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the quiet between storms, something had begun to grow. Not a grand love. But a real one. One built in silence. One that would stay. Jonah Vexley wasn't a man people waited for. He'd gotten used to that. Used to the way silence followed him, even in crowds. Used to the fact that no one called, no one wrote, and if his name was ever spoken, it was as an afterthought. The cabin he lived in wasn't much, 3 rooms, wood stove, tin roof that clattered when it rained. But it was his. Bought cheap, fixed slowly, piece by piece. He kept the porch swept and the garden neat. Not because anyone came by to notice, but because it gave the days shape. That spring, the rain came early. And it didn't stop. By the 3rd day, the river had swollen past the bridge, eating at the roads and turning fields into puddled ruins. The town a few miles west called for evacuations, but Jonah had stayed. He always did. He was slicing apples for a pie he'd likely never finish when someone pounded on the door. Hard. Urgent. He froze, knife hovering midair. It came again. A voice, muffled but unmistakably female, shouted through the storm. "Please. Anyone inside?" Jonah moved quickly, unlocking the door and yanking it open. A woman stood there, drenched and shivering, coat torn at one shoulder, mud streaked up her legs. Her eyes were wide with exhaustion. And desperation. "My car, it stalled in the flood. I've been walking for an hour. I didn't know anyone lived out here." He said nothing. Just stepped aside. She entered without asking twice. 2. Jonah gave her towels. A dry shirt. A steaming mug of peppermint tea. She sat near the stove, hugging her knees, her voice small but steady. "My name's Emran," she said. "I was headed to Meadowridge to see my sister. Took the back roads. Not smart." Jonah shook his head. "Back roads used to be safer." "Used to be," she echoed. She took a slow sip, watching the steam rise. "And you are?" "Jonah." She tilted her head. "You live here alone?" "Yeah. No one else out this way?" He shook his head again. "Doesn't get lonely?" Jonah looked at her directly. It's quieter when no one leaves. Emryn didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Instead, she said, that sounds like a wound you keep stitching. He blinked, surprised. People didn't usually say things like that. 3. The storm didn't stop. By nightfall, the roads were gone, the power was out, and the floodlight outside buzzed once before fading to black. Jonah lit candles and boiled water over the stove. Emryn helped without being asked. They moved around each other like people who knew how to avoid waking ghosts. When they finally sat down to eat, the half-made pie, now turned into warm apple mush over toast, they said very little. It was the first meal Jonah had shared with anyone in nearly 3 years. After, Emryn leaned back and let out a long breath. I thought I wanted to leave this place forever, she said. Jonah glanced at her. You from around here? She nodded. Grew up 2 towns over. Left at 17. Promised myself I wouldn't look back. Did it work? No, she said. It just meant I looked everywhere else. That silence returned, the kind Jonah usually hated. But with her, it didn't bite. It sat. It breathed. 4. That night, she stayed. There was no choice. He offered her the bedroom, he took the couch. She didn't argue. Rain drummed on the windows like fingers tapping messages from old regrets. Jonah didn't sleep. He listened to the wind. The creak of the rafters. The faint, steady rhythm of another person breathing on the other side of the wall. He had lived a long time in his own head. Now, suddenly, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay there. In the morning, she was already up. He found her on the porch, wrapped in his old wool coat, staring at the mist that curled over the flooded valley. You make good tea, she said as he handed her a cup. You make good company, he replied. She smiled faintly. I don't usually. Me neither. They stood in silence for a while. Then she asked, why did you stay out here? Jonah hesitated. My mother passed 6 years ago. Then my brother and I stopped speaking. Everyone else faded out. I figured it was easier not to expect anything. And has it been? He looked at her. No. She didn't smile. Didn't say anything. She just reached for his hand. And held it. 5. They spent the day drying out rugs, boiling pasta, reading an old novel out loud by candlelight. It should have felt strange. It didn't. Jonah found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The way she paused after certain lines in the book. The way she didn't flinch when silence came, she filled it with presence, not noise. That night, when he handed her a blanket, she paused at the doorway. I know this is just one night, she said. He nodded. But I needed it, she added. I didn't know how much. Me too, Jonah said quietly. She stepped closer. I'm scared of going back to my life. Jonah looked down. I'm scared of mine never changing. She leaned in slowly. And kissed him. It wasn't soft. It wasn't urgent. It was real. Tasting of rain and tea and the quiet ache of 2 people who hadn't been touched in far too long. 6. The morning came dry. Blue sky stretched wide above the trees. The river had begun to retreat. The roads would reopen soon. Emryn packed her bag. Jonah stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, heart too full to name. She turned toward him. I don't want to make promises I can't keep, she said. Neither do I. But. He waited. She stepped close again. You were the first place I didn't want to run from. Jonah swallowed hard. You can come back, he said. She nodded. I know. Then she kissed him again, shorter this time, but no less true, and walked down the gravel path toward the road. He didn't watch her leave. But when he went back inside, he found a slip of paper on the kitchen table. Some nights become a beginning. This one was mine. E. Jonah folded the note carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the stove. He didn't know if she would return. But for the first time in years, he wanted to believe someone might. And that was enough.